Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We have the participants from the different time zone. Thank you very much for your participation. In the continuation of our series of webinars on business process management, today we are going to present enterprise risk management. Till now, we have discussed about business process management, the essentials of business process management, business process architecture, how to implement BPM, and how to measure business process management. In addition, we also discussed about the governance and the measurement part of the business process management, which are essential elements. Now, moving forward, managing a business process management also requires managing the risk effectively. So in today's webinar, we have invited Mr. Anupam Kaul to discuss and to share information about enterprise risk management framework. It's my pleasure and honor to have Mr. Anupam Kaul on board and share his experience and his knowledge about the enterprise risk management. A brief about Mr. Anupam Kaul. Mr. Kaul heads and leads the standards, quality management, laboratory management, risk management, and quality in governance initiatives of the CIA Institute of Quality. In a career spanning of 40 years, with extensive exposure to industrial quality control, standard development, conformity assessment, accreditation, both at national and international level. He works closely with the Government of India in determining policy measures for standards and conformity assessment and developed the Indian National Strategy for Standardization that was adopted and released by government and now serves as the most referred document in the standard development domain. He has authored several policy drafts on national technical regulations that are in different stages of development. He chairs the National Committee on Quality Management System at BIS and represents CII on National Board for Certification Bodies and Laboratories. He works for the United Nations as a lead assessor in CDM program. Through his career, Mr. Kaul has had a wide exposure on organization framework, on business excellence, management systems, risk frameworks, and business process management. He conducts training and provide advice to the advisories on risk management at the enterprise and contextual level. A very impressive profile of Mr. Kaul, and thank you so much for giving us your time and discussing about enterprise risk management, sir. Over to you. I do not want to take much time. Please, over to you, and you can share the enterprise risk management framework information. Thank you.
But let's hope that I'm audible and it goes on well. So okay, so we'll start this webinar now, and thank you for all for having me today, Amit, for this presentation. It's always good to associate with you, and just for letting the participants know, I and Amit have been working together on BPM for the last 5 years, and we've had some great successes. We started the BPM Asia programs in India. So it's always good to get back on the Q3 Edge platform as well. So it's a pleasure for me to do this today for all Q3 Edge participants today. And so my topic today, as Amit has already mentioned, is on enterprise risk management. And it's a very, very vast subject. So given the limitation that we have today, about 40, 50 minutes, or maybe at the most that we can stretch to about 1 hour, I'll try and bring in all the important elements of enterprise risk management, which is good for anybody to understand, not only people who are working in the risk domain within the companies who are assigned to work on risk management, but this understanding is good for anyone who works in any enterprise, and even for those people who are consultants or professionals advising companies on different aspects, business excellence, or even management system standards, or in business process management, to understand risks very, very well. So this webinar will contain the framework of the risk. What does risk actually do for organizations? So at 3 levels: at the strategic level, at the functional level, and then at the operational level. And then we'll also look at some of the important key elements of the ERM, things like what is the risk attitude, or what's the risk appetite and risk tolerance, and then the cycle of assessing risks, evaluating risks, and then putting a framework for their mitigation across the organizations. And then also we will look at how does risk integrate with strategic deployment in an organization, and also in the process framework of the organization. And finally, we will also look at how a risk structure is created in an risk management structure is created in an organization. How does it function? What are the different roles in that one? So that's how we will do this one. So with this, I will begin. And this is my, my first slide, as you see on the screen. And what we see here is the title Risk and Rewards. So any business activity that is undertaken, it could be a startup, it could be a new project, it could be a new product launch, it could be an important policy change in an organization, it could be a merger and an acquisition. All of these are all strategic initiatives of organizations, and the outcome of this is what is the reward, that in case it is successful, obviously the organization will be will get the profit and the returns. So it all starts with exploring the new opportunities. That is how it always begins, whether it's a merger and an acquisition, or as I mentioned, a new product launch or a new market territory, anything. So it's always looking at new opportunities, and risk is all about looking. So let us understand this right up front. Although we talk about risk in a negative sense, that something is going to constrain or be an impediment to my initiative, but primarily business is all about looking at opportunities and capitalizing on the opportunities for gain. So that's very clear, and that's what 90%, 95% of businessmen do. So earlier they used to do it instinctively, and now what we are trying to tell them is that if you actually apply a more scientific method of risk management, you can do the same thing better. The chances of failure will be lesser as compared to purely instinctive capitalizing on the opportunities. So all opportunities obviously require investment of cost and of course effort, both. So of course people's efforts and costs. It's always like this. And as I mentioned earlier, this the whole effort translates into returns and profit for the organization, whatever is the purpose of making that investment and capitalizing on the opportunity. And for that, obviously, any company would then set up a realization plan once the opportunity is identified, and we know that we are going to work on it. So there has to be obviously a plan in this. And therefore, normally what we think is, so there will be this, the investment will go into the plan, and the plan will help us get the returns and the profits. It's a very straightforward consideration. But then really what happens is then we start getting the constraints and the impediments. We had not planned for them probably, and then they start appearing as we start realizing our plan. Some of them could be related, and many of them would be relating to execution of the plans. So which they were not really understood in the beginning, and they start coming up. So therefore, these are the the constraints and the impediments. We are unanticipated events that we need to look at, and for that we need to put a filter, which is the putting a risk framework or a risk evaluation exercise in it. So before we start executing the plan, even before we draw up the plan, let's identify what could be the possible potential constraints and impediments, and look at how much of these are going to impact my realization and my ultimate objective of the game. And that will help me then in taking a decision, either to go ahead or to stop, or if I can control some of these impediments or constraints, then I'll take actions to ensure that my success, the chances of my success, it becomes higher. And therefore the investments then, they started looking at the constraints and the impediments, and from there the risk evaluation, and therefore then we put up what we call is the risk management framework, which help us identify, analyze, and evaluate the different type of risks through a very detailed diligence process. All good, smart organizations today, whenever they set up any kind of a strategic plan, risk evaluation, risk assessment is now integral to the plan. There has to be a very dedicated chapter within the business plan of what are the anticipated risks and what are we going to do about it. So, and then risk can, of course, as we all know very clearly, and what we are witnessing today, that many of the risk sources are outside the organization. So we cannot do anything really to control those. It's outside our ability, our capability. But then many of them are actually reside inside the organizations. And we look at some of the risk sources later on what could be the impediment that are within the organization. One of them we all very, very clearly know, for example, is that when we work in silos in the organization, so each division, each function, they work to their own interests or to their own objectives, and they don't really collaborate with each other, and that becomes a major impediment in achievement of objective because synergy is not created. So I'm just giving an example of what are the internal factors that could start playing. So that is one, and then the exercise also helps in the trade-off between the anticipated gains and the possible losses. So I mean, we really put a finger down and say, okay, the chances of failure could be, let's say, 2% or 3% or 5%, but much greater chances of success. And if you succeed, the profits are going to be very, very good. It could even be a windfall. So then let's take that risk. So it just helps us in making that judgment whether we should continue with the plan, or alternatively, we can always determine, no, the chances of a risk appearing is high. Or if the risk actually appears, even if it is low, chances of failure will be colossal, and all our investments, we will lose. So then probably, the risk level is high. We decide, no, we should not go ahead, or we take a detour, or we, scale down our expectations, or we do a pilot first, and then we enter into a market. So many of these risk mitigation strategies could be then adopted. So a trade-off is always there when we do this risk management exercise. And therefore, so every strategic decision, as I mentioned, policy change or investments, or even borrowings or diversifications or new partnerships, all of them are strategic decisions. Each one of them entail risk, and therefore they must be considered before we go ahead. So therefore, this is the proper flow chart that we need to have for all of strategic planning and strategic deployment in the organization. So risk management per se, I mean, we get to enterprise management is having a system, very clear. It could be in the entire organization. We could even do it at a functional level, particular division, or we can even look at the management system standard that we have, QMS or EMS and all of them. So they present a context. We can do it for that as well. Essentially, it is just a discovery of risks at different levels, as I mentioned earlier, strategic, functional, and operational level. And then to look at how each of these risks will impact the, the initiative that we are taking, and also the targets, the goal, the objective that we are setting, how it is going to be, the risk will impact us. And for that, we need to have some kind of a basic framework that will enable us to identify those risks, and then also to be able to manage them. A very simple one is, a division head himself can set up a team and do a little bit of brainstorming, identify the risk, and then he assigns responsibilities to people and says, okay, this is how we'll manage. And then the management is nothing but integrating the risk response into process framework, and say that these are the things that we will additionally do when we are running our process. Again, there is no real prescription on the manner of how we discover these risks. There are multiple methods, and some of them are given in the ISO standard, ISO 31010, 31010, which gives us, it has about 30-40 different kind of techniques on which we identify the risks. And some of you who are probably the quality professionals or even hazard risk analysis professionals, who've done this before, the heat map, for example, that was in OSHA's. And then we also have the risk register, in the information security management system, things like those, or environment risk register. So or even those of us who have been shop floor quality professionals. So we have run PFMEA techniques, all risk-based. So there are multiple methods by which SWOT analysis itself is a tool for determining the risk. So there are multiple ways, and all are good, incidentally. We just choose and we see which one works for us best, or we can have a combination. So risk management, again, just to make it very, very clear, it is not an independent management system. It is not like a quality management system or an environment management system. So it doesn't come with its own outcomes. Quality management, for example, comes with an outcome of consistent quality that meets customer requirements. So, but risk management does not come like that. Risk management is just a tool. It's just an enabler. Anything, any context, the entire management system of the organization or contextual, it just helps, it enables into better quality decision making, more insights, and giving more stakeholder value for each of the stakeholder categories. It just gets embedded into the operations very, very clearly. We cannot run a separate risk management framework and get certified for it. Although there are some organizations who do that, but that's only for maturity and not for clearly drawn criteria. So then ERM, when we look at the ERM, then it talks about all significant risks in the organization in an integrated manner. So every division, every function, the entire strategic board level strategic processes, all of them are part of the ERM. It's a very broad portfolio of risk at all levels, and there is a hierarchy of risk, as we have a hierarchy of objective deployment and a hierarchy of processes. We'll see a diagram later on this one. And it is certainly, definitely a part of the strategic planning process. So annual plans that are made, or long-term plans or midterm plans, whenever they are made, or even sectoral plans when they are made, any plan that is made within the organization. It could even be divisional plans, for example, HR plan or resource plan or financial plans. All of them will include risk management or a framework for this, which is a part of the ERM then. And successful and effective ERM, as we see here, requires a deep understanding of the business itself. I mean, you cannot just run an ERM if you don't have clear understanding of the external environment, of your own internal environment of the organization. What is the culture? Who are the stakeholders? What are their needs and expectations? What is the external environment? Have we done a proper scan? What are the, like the Michael Porter's 5 forces? Have we done the analysis of them clearly? So all of that. And then very importantly, are we sure about our internal organization culture? And then what are our own strengths and weaknesses? So there has to be a lot of prerequisite work that needs to be done before we actually can do any serious ERM work in the organization. We cannot just superimpose. It is first a very clear understanding. So a framework like the business excellence model that we have, EFQM, Malcolm Baldrige, if we have that, that already gives us a very strong indication of how we are placed, both externally and internally. And then if you apply ERM framework, it works beautifully. So of course, as we know, ERM has been growing in relevance, and multiple factors, as we see here, have been instrumental in its in making it more and more important. So increased market volatility. We have been seeing this for so many years now, and particularly if you see the last 2-3 years, markets have been extremely volatile for multiple reasons. We have had high-profile events. We have the subprime crisis, for example, 2008 and then 2011, and many other events, which have actually had an impact on the Enron initially, of course, that brought into effect the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in the US, and that set up a worldwide system of having regulatory requirements for risk management. And then, of course, what we are seeing now, pandemic. And this pandemic, of course, is different from all others because no single company in the world actually planned for a disruption of this nature as we are seeing right now. We have had pandemics earlier. We had Ebola, we had H1N1, we had SARS earlier. Many of them, but they had limited impact, and therefore the world did not stop. And companies only had to look at how they'll be able to meet the supply chain requirements, and therefore look at their own business continuity and get over it quickly. So that is how it was. This kind of disruption that we are seeing today, almost no company was actually prepared. Even those that were allowed to run during the pandemic, the essential commodities companies, for example, they really struggled, to find methods to be able to deliver product, including the medical companies, the FMCG companies, all of them struggled. But then we did see in certain companies, they were actually doing better than many others. Some of them were able to, for example, supply products within a day or two, and others were saying, no, we'll take 5 days or 6 days. So there was, a difference in the companies, probably because they already had planned for the scenario of risk management of this nature, and therefore they were able to do a little better than many other companies. So now we have learned something new, that there could also be a possibility, like we learned when the tsunami came, for example, which came once in 100 years, that we can have something like this as well. It's actually a tsunami, in a sense, which we never really anticipated. But now companies will also be prepared of what to do, when there is a complete stop all over the world in terms of businesses and supply chain. So ARM, of course, as we mature, as we see more and more events happening, it also matures across our organizations, across sectors. And so all companies are slowly getting into it. And of course, they're all different levels of maturity. So this is just a graphic. I'm not going to get into details, just to show that all over the world, all these responses have come in the form of regulations or standards or guidelines like this, including banking, including stock exchanges, including insurance companies, all of them. And many of them are depending completely on risk assessment. And then regulatory oversight. So India also, as you see down below, we've had the same listings clause 49, which requires all the listed organizations to have a risk management structure, an audit committee, and the risk will be reported to the board, and that will be seen, of course, by SEBI. So looking at the risk definition, why it is important here is because whenever we peg risks within the organizational framework, we must do that with a very definite objective or purpose, and that is to link the risk to objectives of the organization. Objectives are, as we'll see a graphic, can occur at different levels in the organization, but we cannot have risk just like that. Of course, in a normal day-to-day life, we talk about risk to ourselves, to our family, to our finances, many things, and we talk about risk in general. So something like, if you are aware of the English grammar, so there's the transitive verb and the intransitive verb. So risk is transitive. That means we need to have a subject on which we are applying the risk, and that subject is objectives. So that is how the definition has been framed in ISO 31000. And also the other important framework, that many of you would probably be aware is the COSO framework. COSO is an acronym for a committee of sponsoring organizations of the Treadway Commission. This is, coming together of our 6-7 companies in US who framed guidelines. So there have been different versions of this. We have a latest one. It is not free to download anymore. You can buy it from the internet. But these two documents put together, 31000 in COSO framework, will give anyone who wants to start an ERM, become an ERM professional, must read at least as a very minimum these two documents. The 31000 is a brief document. It just gives broad framework, broad principles, and the primary processes. COSO is a very, very detailed document. You need time to go through it and understand it, but you must read this. So both these documents, as you see over here, talk in terms of events or uncertainties that will be there in the achievement of the business objectives. So it's like this. And uncertainty, as we see over here, is a state of not knowing what's going to happen, how events will actually manifest. That's uncertainty, and that is prevalent at all points of time. So beyond colloquial understanding of the usage of the term, when we talk of risk in business context, it is always linked to attainment of objectives, and therefore an organization which does not have a formal objectives framework, deployment framework. Some of them are known to us, Hoshin Kanri or the Balanced Scorecard, which are formal methods. But even if you don't have that, in case you have a system internally of having the top level objectives, deploying them down the line to strategic functional levels, and then at the process level, if you have that, then only risk management will be working effectively in the organization. If you don't have that, it will not work. It's very simple. It's like this. So therefore, as I mentioned, ERM support business strategy. First is, what is business strategy? It's strategic and operational planning, all about formulation, implementation, and evaluation of all the cross-functional decisions that we take in the organization to run the businesses and to achieve whatever we want to achieve. And then, ERM or organization-wide risk management is just the holistic approach for prioritizing our risk responses in accordance with the business strategy and the plan. So which are the top risks? Which are the most important objectives? How are the risks are going to impact the objectives? And that's what we start looking at. We create a prism or a filter for doing that. And then we set up a system, a process of identifying, assessing, treatment, review, reporting of the risks, which we have identified, and then look at how they are at any given point of time impacting our objectives. So we set up risk indicators, for example, and we keep looking at them, and then satisfy ourselves that we are going all right, or there is something which is happening elsewhere, somewhere which we have not seen earlier. The risk indicator tells us we need to do a correction. It's like this. And then ERM applies, as I mentioned earlier, across all areas and all levels of the organization. It's again a hierarchy, and we'll see a graphic again on that one. So it ensures that we identify. This is also to understand that within the organization, if we start doing a risk, preparing a risk register, you will land up in each function or division more than 100 or 150 risk lists. That's the normally which I have done in my consulting or my trainings. When we start identifying risk to a function, people generally land up in about more than 100 or 150. We cannot possibly devote time, effort, and energy or cost for mitigating each and every risk. So ERM therefore also tells us to identify or to be able to select the most important or the critical risk that we need to address, and which is going to have the most major impact on our functioning and our progress. So that's again a very important thing. And for that also we'll see something called a risk appetite with the organizations must have. So the graph again just to compare, and I'll not spend much more time on this. The right side, as you see over here, is the formal structure as compared to the left hand side. Left hand side, if you see, the traditional one is only focused on assets and financials, for example, and people addressed risk on a silo basis. There was no consistency. On the right hand side, if you see, it's actually a board level owned activity and explicit consideration of all types of risk, operational and strategic. And also it gets integrated with all the general management processes. The PPM framework, as Amit would talk to you about, it gets integrated with that. And then we create structures, proper structures, formal structures for risk oversight. A risk coordinator, normally titled as CRO or a chief risk officer. And then clear accountabilities for everyone in the organization, the risk managers and the risk owners, and create a specific framework for risk reporting according to each stakeholder, and then a system of regular review and monitoring and review of the risk profile. So that's how a system starts working, just creating a formal system as compared to informal system on the left-hand side. So then I mentioned to you our objectives, and objectives also come in two types, as we see on the top, the stated ones and the unstated ones. We are very clear about the stated objectives, and of course, most of ERM will be dedicated to this. So are those that are embedded in the business plan, very clearly articulated in terms of numbers, targets, goals, all of them, cascaded down below, different levels. And then the most structured, as I mentioned to you, is the process of articulation of objectives. The better we apply the risk lens to them. And very clearly, I mean, we all know, those of us who are aware of the business balance scorecard, for example, we know objectives go beyond financial. They go into people, for example, they go into process, for example. So, examples of them are there, and customer, of course, obviously. So all the different perspectives are there. So we need to have strategic objectives, and down below also for each type of activity that we do in the organization. So ERM framework therefore addresses all types of objectives again, right? We'll see again a little bit more on that one. But then also importantly, as we should be very, very conscious about this, are the unstated objectives in the organization. And we sometimes tend to forget this, but if we forget them, we will commit an error of not giving due emphasis on some of the risks which are going to impact them. And therefore, one of them is the unstated objective is that we must survive. We must continue to remain in business. That goes without saying. And remaining in business today, as we are saying, MSMEs, many of them are on the verge of closure. They may not be able to remain in business. So there is an external factor which is impacting them. But then probably many of the companies, many of the MSMEs probably who had cash reserves, who had actually planned for such an event that there could be a stoppage of 6 months to 1 year's time. Do we have those reserves somewhere stashed or a method of gaining access to funds? Would probably survive, and many would not, who do not have that. So they will get into the spiral and they will go down. So it's like this. Then of course, this is maintaining performance levels, financial, customer base, market position, brand reputation. All of them are unstated objectives. We must continue to maintain whatever is our current position. We want to improve, but as a very minimum, we want to sustain our levels which are there. This is an unstated objective, which is always existing. And then all compliances, regulatory, particularly, is again an unstated objective. We don't really put that in a framework of objectives in the company, but it's a given. Then again, as we are saying, resilience to change is again a given objective. Currently, the change is happening so fast all around us, and if we are not resilient, we'll not be able to survive. So that's coming up as a brand new unstated objective. And then sustaining our culture and values in the organization. Again, as we have seen many, many times, the top man changes and the culture of the organization completely changes. A manager changes in a particular division, the culture changes in the organization, the value system changes. It's very important that the good companies always sustain the culture and the values in the organization. So that continuity is extremely important, and therefore that is a big risk if we allow the culture to denigrate or deteriorate partly or fully in the organization. So things will drastically change. So unstated objectives must therefore be always kept in the picture. And then these are the stakeholders who get impacted by our work, and therefore also with the risks that we are having in the organizations. Obviously customers by the products and the delivery modes and the services that we offer to them. Certainly the employees, government regulators, who are accountable to, also accountable to community, environment, energy, many things. To, of course, our management, investors, board, all of them, and generally to the society. So all of them are impacted by what work we do, and therefore the risk is impacting each one of them, and therefore the value that we provide to each one of them will also get eroded if we do not account for the risks that are there. So this is the framework that I was talking to you about. So look at these three distinct levels that the organizations function in. The top one, of course, is the strategic level. And here we talk mostly in terms of growth targets, turnover targets, return on investments, for example, and profitability and things like those. And for that, then we set up the business processes in place, the top level business processes, which include market acquisition, for example, deciding on which markets, mergers, acquisitions, also CapEx investments, technology investments, product planning, new product launches, for example, and then managing resources and finances. All these are the top level business processes. And then in these processes, then the failures could occur at the strategic level. We have cash flow crunch. Again, it's a top level risk. And then credit rating downgrade of the companies. Again, I mean, right now we go through a country level downgrade, but similarly at the company level also. Then market share erosion is a risk at the top level, the company level. And reputational loss. We have seen so many cases of companies, the best of companies, for things that they did not do directly, but they had suffered. We know the FMCG company, I can't name it here, but they suffered a major reputational loss because of some regulatory action outside. They went through that. So it's a strategic loss. And then the company actually started mitigating those kind of risks. I mean, setting up a system that such a thing should never happen again. So it's like this. And then from there, then we get to the next tactical level or the functional level of the objectives. So here, when we look at, we're talking about functions and divisions. So mostly the managers are looking at resource efficiencies of their own work, because they're accountable to costs and to returns. Time to market, for example, is something which is tactical in nature, or compliances and stakeholder value, whether it's employees or customers or suppliers or anybody else. So stakeholder value management is a functional target, and maintaining business continuity again is a business target at the functional level, and for which the processes are therefore managing all the resources, the capital equipment, the people, and planning for delivery, all kinds of planning, in fact. And so I'm talking about delivery planning, includes many other sub-plans. Then the engineering of the processes, and of course also the workforce management. So these are key important business processes at the functional level. And the risks here, therefore, at the tactical level are that whatever we want to achieve as planned we don't meet targets. So it's low performance as compared to our own target, or compared to what we did last year or the year prior to that. So we go down on performance. There could be major stakeholder disengagement. It could be people, it could be suppliers, it could be customers. So that is always a major risk, and we have seen many companies, just by a small policy change, really disengages the people, and the losses could be monumental. Compliance failures is again a major risk, and that's the accountability lies at the tactical and functional level only. All regulatory failures as well as contractual compliance failures, SLAs, for example. And then design failures, whether process design or a structure design or a product design. So they could fail. And then again, so we have seen many times, we make a OD change in organization, we make a structural change. We are happy always doing re-verticalization and re-horizontalization in companies. And then we see that something is not working for us. So it's a design failure. And then finally, at the operational level, it's all about product performance, or service performance, or delivery performance. These are the targets that we assign at that level always, if you remember. Productivity targets, obviously, and then cost targets. They are assigned mostly at the operational level. I mean, I'm giving only key targets, and there could be many more, certainly. And for this, the processes, therefore, are all that, things that we do at the shop floor or in process management, making and delivering the process. So all those small processes all over the organization, stitching them together, integrating them, making and delivering. Then, of course, customer engagement. Similarly, other stakeholder engagement as well, supply chain also, vendor engagement, for example, managing supply chain process, and all kinds of monitoring, audits, reviews. All these processes are operational processes that we run at that level. And here, predominantly, the risks are that we have losses and wastages, losses in terms of idling of machines, idling of people, PPM failures, service failures, and wastages, all kinds of muri, all those things that we have. So all of them are happening at this level, and which all contributes ultimately not in level objectives. Then, of course, we have quality failures all over, process failures, not only quality in terms of product and services, but within the processes as well. And then all kinds of safety, security failure that could have happened in the company. So that if you can visualize this whole graphic, you get a very good idea of what are the strategic level objectives, which are the processes, and what are the risks. And similarly at the functional tactical level, and then at the operational level. So that's how a ERM framework starts working for the organization. Once you have a good idea about this, you can start setting up the framework. So therefore, this is the framework, and very important some definitions that I would like to bring to your attention. So all of ERM, or all of risk, in fact, not ERM, I would say, all of risk taking in the organization is a function of the risk attitude of the organization. And we see, a wide variation in risk attitude of the organization. I, for example, went once to assess for business excellence, a microfinance company in Eastern India. And the model that they were pursuing they were giving micro loans to self-help group of women, and their model was zero NPA. Zero NPA means zero NPA. Not a single case they had where there was a default. So the question therefore was, and then we looked at their business, the growth. It was actually quite sedentary, I should say. So, I mean, a point that we raised as an assessment team was that why can't you actually have some percentage of NPA? And that will help you grow your business many, many times. But they said, no, we don't want to get into that. We are happy with what we are doing. So that was a clear indication of risk attitude of a company. Any other bank, any other microfinance company, any other such fintech company, for example, would cater to a certain amount of NPA because we enlarge our customer base to a particular extent. There would be some default, and that's okay. We'll live with that. So we'll build those costs, into our structures, about our financial plans, and that's it. So I just thought I'll give you this illustration just to make it clear what's the risk attitude. And there are many companies, for example, so compliances with regulations or anti-bribery policies, things like these are also functions of risk attitude. So no go, no tolerance. We know so many companies who say nothing doing. If there is a risk, if there is any kind of a non-compliance, we'll not do it, period. That's right. So that's risk attitude. Okay. And then the next one is capacity. How much risk can the organization absorb? This is actually more in terms of numerical. That means what is our capability? Do we have those cash reserves I mentioned to you earlier? So can we therefore take we can take a hit in terms of our growth or in terms of our business for how much time? So what is, or maybe we have an insurance or somebody to back up as a backup. So what is our risk capacity? How much risk can we actually take? This is defined with the scope and boundary of the available resources to the company. The third one is a risk appetite. This is an attitude. This is again a kind of an attitude of the company. How much, given the attitude, given the capacity, actually how much risk are we going to take? Again, giving the same example. So risk appetite of that particularly microfinance company was zero. They said, no, we will not take any risk whatsoever. Another company will say, okay, 2% of NPA is our risk appetite. That's okay. Or if we don't, other risk appetite is, so we are setting a target for, let's say, growth, and we say 10% growth, and we say, okay, for growth, even if it is not 10%, 5% also is good for us. That's the risk appetite. Okay, we can go down on this one. And that's broadly. Risk tolerance is more definite. Every single indicator of performance, we put a risk tolerance. Okay, if not this much, how much down below can we go? Many processes, we say no deviation means no deviation. For example, if there is, again, as I mentioned to you, a cultural issue or a code of conduct. So most of the time, the risk tolerance is zero. No breach of this thing. But similarly, safety, we can say no, absolutely we want zero accidents. But sometimes zero accident doesn't work for us. So we say, okay, minor accident, we can say, okay, five in a year or 10 in a year, maybe is our risk tolerance. I mean, that much we can absorb, but no major accident, no fatality. That could be a risk tolerance. So therefore, all of this, and then risk profile is an important definition again, or term to understand, is a description of any set of risks. So we need to put risks together. We do prioritization of the risk. We set up different contexts. So in each context, which are the top risks that we want to address? The first is the full profile, and then the profile that we want to really work upon. So it can apply to the entire organization at the top level. It could be part, or it could also be stakeholder defined or otherwise function defined. And then of course, risk owner, we'll talk about this a little later. So again, the same thing, I'm running a little short of time. So appetite applies mostly at the strategic level and focus on the broader goals. Tolerance applies at the strategy implementation level and at the middle level or the operational goals. And indicators and triggers are what are the specific risks at different levels that we are looking at. So then this big question comes, how do we classify risks? And there are multiple ways of doing this. The first is what you see on the left-hand side. So there are risks or threats that emanate from external sources and the internal sources. So external sources risk, we cannot do too much about it. Although we had people like Harshad Mehta who tried to do even that, I mean, on a lighter note, but then mostly externally driven risk, we are unable to control and they will happen. So we have a reactionary strategy in place. For example, a regulatory change is coming up. we can have a system of addressing those and talking to the regulator and all that. But most of the time, we'll not be able to do anything to that. But importantly, we must always have a full understanding and a full listing of the external threats that we have to the organization, which is part of the environmental scan. And then internal sources, I mean, this is a deliberate and very long, should be a long exercise, or I should say a major exercise, understanding all possible sources of risk within the organization. It could come from people, from processes, from assets, from equipment, from partners, associates, many of them. So who we have developed or we have assembled. So therefore, we have much greater control on what we can do with the internal threats or internal sources of the risk. So this first classification should be this, and then different frameworks classify risk in also in the middle. So there could be, as I mentioned to you, strategic risks, operational risks. There could be, again, financial risks, which most of the companies do. Compliance, many companies put them together separately. So they do health checks of companies of different functions. So compliance risk, both as I mentioned, regulatory as well as contractual, and then a reporting risk also. Sometimes there could be major risk in reporting itself. So that also sometimes is taken as a class of risk. And then on the right hand side, of course, these are the functions or tactical activities of the organizations. So we can certainly, and most of the time it is done, that all of them are classified according to these functions. And just to give you an example of, just one example of how to differentiate between functional risk and the process risk within supply chain. So if you see in the middle, these are mostly things which are done at the planning level, the supplier policy, whether, for example, whether we should have a single policy or single supplier or multiple suppliers for the same product, whether what kind of contract term we must have, how do we provide, for example, for purchase cost escalation, what will be our outsourcing policy, how should we plan our inventory and warehousing capacity and supplier development, how much cost we can incur and what will be the benefits. All of these are tactical in nature. Each one of them comes with its own risk. So if we have a single supplier, we have a risk of disruption. We have multiple suppliers, we have a risk of variation in quality. So again, it's like this, contractual terms again. So, many times we tend to go overboard or we miss something very important. And then when something happens, materializes, we find that we have not plugged that into our contract document. Outsourcing, again, it comes, it's actually a solution in many, many ways that we can focus on our core activities, but outsourcing comes with a great pain many times because we have to apply so many additional controls on the organizations. So give me an example. And process risk, again, very, very clear. So supplier evaluation, we don't do a good supplier evaluation, we'll end up with lousy suppliers, or we can go overboard on supplier evaluation, spend a lot of time on that, which is not really required. Similarly, inventory management, I mean, we can run out of inventory, we can build up inventory, we can have imbalanced inventory, many of these things will actually happen. Inadequate purchase orders can play havoc with what orders we place, we get product that is supplied and then we find out that we never actually wanted this. Some supply disruptions, quality variation, communication errors with suppliers, many of them are therefore normal process risk. That's how we differentiate between a planning or a functional tactical risk and a process risk. Okay. And then risk indicators, again, is something that gets set up within the ERM framework. Risk indicator are, all those things that you must have seen, a control chart, for example, that many of you will be familiar with. So all those, where it goes beyond the 3 sigma level, that's a risk indicator. Similarly, everywhere, what's happening around us, something is happening. For example, when we talk in terms of outstandings, and we are looking at our customers, and suddenly we find that our customers themselves are in financial trouble, and therefore, there are greater chances that we may not be able to recover our outstanding, for example. Loss of market share, for example. So, we're looking at policy of our major client, and we are looking at there's a policy shift, and it actually, he can walk away from us, or he may stop a particular line that he's buying from us. So, looking at his policy making itself is a risk indicator for me as a supplier. Entry of a competitor in the market is itself a risk indicator that can actually impact me. One point in time, I was doing consulting of a major steel major in India. And at that point, at 2013, I remember, one of the risks that were identified as a risk indicator by the company was that at that time, China was going through a glut. And China had a capacity of 650 million tons production of steel. And they said that if China is going to a glut, there's going to be a possibility that they're going to dump steel into the world market. And it's going to impact our prices. It actually happened within 1 year. So that was the risk indicator that they were looking at, which actually worked like this. Okay, similarly, of course, I mean, look at increase in delivery time by a supplier, and that could lead, is a risk for my supplies in due course of time. So those of you who have done risk at any level must be aware of this cycle of risk management process. It's nothing but establishing a context and then setting up a system for identifying, creating a risk of list, putting a filter for risk analysis. And the most common filter is the likelihood and impact heat map. And of course, for other things like a PFMEA, we also put an additional indicator, for example, strength of detection and all that. So we can always add or delete, not delete, sorry, likelihood impact should always be there. And then based on that, we say, okay, these are the top risks. Something which hits on a 5x5 matrix, something which hits about 15, for example, is the risk that I will treat. I will do something about it. And then risk treatment, we have multiple options. And then we have a monitoring and a review system. So that's the ISO 31000 framework for a risk management. I mean, are we okay on time? Another 10, 15 minutes is okay?
Yeah, sir.
Is it interesting? Is it going, is it okay?
So please carry on.
Okay.
We have time.
Okay,
yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, right, fair enough. Okay. Again, I mean, this is something which is not new, which will be, I think, not new to most of you. You would be certainly aware of this. The multiple type of risk treatment options, which again, we look at the risk appetite, the risk attitude, and the risk tolerance of the company in place. So based on that, we have multiple options. So before we go into risk control and mitigation, we can always have the option of terminating the risk. So we decide not to go ahead with our plan. A new product launch, and we find, no, it's too risky, too many similar products in the market already. I had a friend, for example, who was wanting to start a collaboration tool 2 years back, and he was very, very optimistic about it. It was in the US, came to India, very optimistic collaboration tool. I mean, it said we can turn into millionaires and all that. And today we are looking at a market where there's no dearth of collaboration tools. We are using one right now, and most of them are free. And of course, or the cost is so little that a startup probably could never have sustained that kind of thing. So better terminated. The project never actually then it went ahead. Then we can transfer risk, by outsourcing. For example, I gave the example earlier. We can set up an insurance, for example, and transfer our risk to somebody else. Okay, and then most of the time, what happens when I talked about a risk list? So let's say 100, 150 risks, and we select about 5 or 6 of them. What happens to the remaining? So the remaining we accept. We say that we will live with these risks. They are small risks. They are part of life. So that's okay. And we cannot possibly mitigate every single risk. So that's what we do. So retaining the risk by choice. Most of the time in risk management, please understand, it is risk acceptance. Only for those that we identify as major risk, we either terminate or we transfer, or finally, if we can't do any of these, then we get into risk control or risk mitigation methods, risk treatment methods, for example. And again, here multiple options are available. We can tinker with the source of the risk, terminate it, alter it, like this. And again, giving a more concrete example, for example, if we have a fire risk in a company coming from electrical installation. So we look at the entire wiring system, we look at the system of MCBs and RCCBs in the company, and we say, okay, this is the load today that we have, but there could be a surge tomorrow, there could be a peak load can change tomorrow. So better, we have a source of the wiring system, anywhere it can actually catch fire. So multiple ways we can set up a higher load system that can take higher load, or we can go higher quality cables and systems which will not catch fire, or a fire retardant material. So multiple things we can do with those sources. It's like this, okay? And of course, and in many cases, for example, where we have explosive environment, for example, we keep the source outside. We don't even keep the source electrical. Everything is outside the system. Nothing is inside. No motor, no transformer, nothing within let's say 50 meters of a gas installation like this. So that's removing the source of the risk outside. It's like this. And similarly, in IT environment, we create, for example, in the BCP plan, we create one more source of activity at the DR center. So we run the source from our own center, and we have another one. So it's like this. So that's what we can do about the source of the risk. And then changing the nature and magnitude of their likelihood. For example, safety accidents in a company. So if we put safeguards and measures, we can actually tinker with the occurrence of the risk. By training people, we can reduce occurrence. and by putting safeguards, we can reduce the impact of the risk as well. Changing the consequences also is possible, that the damage that will occur if the risk is realized will be minimized. All of business continuity planning is essentially this, changing the consequences. If something happens which is beyond our control, if a disruption occurs, how quickly can we restore, how quickly can we recover, and therefore not let the supply chain get impacted because of us. So changing the consequences. By not having a BCP, you will be completely at a loss what to do when a crisis occurs. But if you have a BCP, it helps you in containing the consequences. So those are the kinds of risk treatment options depending upon the nature of the risk. Some are strategic in nature, BCP is strategic in nature, a safety is tactical or operational in nature. So that's how we look at the risk options that can apply, and the principles remain the same. The nature by which we attempt to solve them will change at the different levels. Again, now, so this is important again. The 2 slides I just wanted to show on this. So risk control and implementation. So the effectiveness of the internal control, how effective it is that eliminated or reduced by the proposed control measures. So how stringent should be the control will be a function of how big the risk is. It's like this, okay? And I'll give you some examples, or maybe I can give it right away. So if you look at government organizations, you must have seen a file moves across stations within the ministry. So it starts at the undersecretary level, goes to the deputy secretary, then it goes to the joint secretary, it goes to the digital secretary, it goes to the secretary, it goes to the minister. The minister puts in a query, it goes down the same level, comes back to the undersecretary, who gives a response, again goes up the same hierarchy and comes down. On a file, you'll find sometimes 20 signatures. Now, what did these people actually do to the process? Did they add value? Any one of them? Hardly any. What is a signature? It's a control measure. That means somebody is applying a mind to say whether the proposal is good or bad. But most of the time you find that it is done in a very perfunctory manner. It's just a signature that is being put only to satisfy the process, the SOP that is laid down. So that kind of, what is the impact of this? That a normal case that should have been resolved probably in a day or 2 may take months to get resolved because the file keeps lying somewhere. So a control measure that is put is not a function in such a case of the risk that is encountered. What is the risk? That a wrong decision may be taken by the minister. So does it need to go through so many steps? Probably not. So when I did a consulting of an organization, I could actually reduce many processes just like this. One process, there were 14 steps, I could reduce it to 4. It's like this. So controls that are applied should be a function of the risk that is. I challenge them. So what is the risk of your process? And it was found that it is very, very nominal. It is not a financial decision or a very small financial decision. So maybe just 2 or 3 people can look at it, and that's it. Why do you want to have so much of control like this? And same thing happens in all kinds of processes. It's the engineering process or it's IT process. How much control do you want to build in? Each control costs either time or money, always. So both, and there could be casualties. So therefore, cost effectiveness of internal control is the cost of implementing the control compared to the risk reduction benefits that is expected. So we must be extremely conscious of when we apply a control, do we need this control or are we not putting a control somewhere and therefore we are allowing the process to run at risk? Okay. So therefore, any control that we are putting in any place should be measured in terms of the benefit of that control, economic benefit, or not always economic benefit. Sometimes like safety, for example, cannot be measured through economic benefit, certainly, but then that is the risk indicator changes over there or consideration changes. At the same time, we still have to look at it, whether the purpose is going to be achieved or not, what is the benefit that we are going to get from that additional control. Okay, right. So look at how we integrate the risk management. Strategy management. So we have these 3 things. Everybody is aware of this, and from here we get into goal strategies and the budgets of the organization. So from here, then, right at this stage itself, we need to have a structure of a strategic and a compliance risk management. It could be a board oversight committee, or it could be a steering committee within the organization that is set up for this strategic and compliance risk management. And this here, all the goal strategies and budgets, and this committee, they have to look at the external context and the internal context. Detailed exercises are carried out for each one of these. And from here, then, only after it has gone through the filter of the risk assessment by the committee, should it get into the functional plan execution. The first slide that I showed to you, right? And from here, then we actually start implementing the functional level risk management From where then we get the outcome, which are the risk profile and the treatment options that we get. It starts happening. From here, then we get into a risk review each time, or maybe there is a change or something new has happened, there's a risk indicator, or even every 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, we can set up a risk review mechanism that will tell us whether we are doing the risk management correctly, there's a problem in the execution of or not. And then from here, the risk review outcome also gets back into the risk strategy compliance, risk management, okay? And then this outcome measurement also gives us a gap. It helps us in understanding why we did not achieve the targets, why we did not achieve the goals, why we are failing on achieving the strategic objectives. So that gaps in results comes not only from a review of general review, management reviews, but also the risk review structure that we have created. It gives insight into why we did not achieve some of the targets and the plans and the goals that were there. So risk framework helps us in doing this as well. It gets back again into a risk review framework, right? Sorry. Okay, and then integrated risk into process management. How is this done then? So this is after we've set up the risk management framework in the company, okay? So it starts with, therefore, the risk oversight structure that I mentioned to you. And from there, it gets into something which is called a risk policy. Risk policy is nothing but an articulation of the risk attitude and the risk appetite, or sometimes also risk capacity of the company. That is our risk policy, what we encourage our employees to do and what not to do as far as risk is concerned. And from there, then we get into the functional and the process objectives. From here, then we have, again, as we saw earlier, the risk attitude and the risk appetite. Now it applies at this level, at the risk tolerance level. Each functional objective, process level objective, we have to apply, whether we have to achieve it 100% or we can deviate from a process objective up to a particular level, depending upon the risk attitude and the risk appetite that is given to us by the company at the top level. Okay. From here, then we get into, of course, as we mentioned, creating the risk list and the risk profile, and then we operate a risk management at the process level or at the operational level, right? From here, again, we have the process results and the outcomes. So whether a process is giving the right outcome or not is, again, we continue to measure that. So every process, therefore, must have an indicator, and that is looked at from a risk perspective. Okay, so we look at then the risk review based on the process outcome, whether we did assess the risk correctly or not of the process, gets back into operational risk management, and then the execution issues of the process, looking at the risk, looking at the control measures, for example, this is getting applied at this level, okay? And then we also have this additional key risk indicator that I mentioned to you earlier, that is then also applied to the risk review mechanism, and this gives us, again, an option, whether we are okay with the risk tolerance, whether we can take a little more deviation, or we need to tighten our risk tolerances further, right? And from here, it then gets into risk reporting and gets into the risk oversight committee. So this is then the framework within ERM of the integrating risk into process management. We saw into strategic management, and then this one into the process management. I hope this is clear to everybody. Of course, I shared the presentation with you. You can use it. And this is very handy in terms of a visual of the entire process, how we must integrate. Because this is a BPM webinar also, I thought I created this slide for this one so that we are very clear of what we have to look at the risk in both strategy deployment and into process management deployment. So again, coming back to this process monitoring and this is very important, as I mentioned to you earlier. So higher the risk, the greater the control and the monitoring. And one important thing that we must always remember, many times this question is asked to me, so how much documentation do we need to do in a company? So we do, is a process allowed to run without any documentation, or do we need to actually write a full procedure? Or what should be, or work instructions or guidelines or checklists and things like those. So do remember that any amount of documentation that we do in a company is a risk response. So the, documentation helps us in educating people, creating awareness, also in unifying the way the processes are run in a company. So when we have a process being run by many, many people, and there are chances that people may deviate from what is a general understanding, it is sometimes better to write a work instruction or put a visual or write a detailed SOP so that everybody is on page with the understanding of the particular process. Okay. So the documentation, please understand, is the extent of documentation, again, is a function of the response to the risk that we see in deviation from norm that is otherwise expected the people will follow. Similarly, applying limits on the process parameter, let's say in engineering control, is again a function or putting up, let's say, a Pokayoke somewhere, or in an IT framework, we put, you know, the integrity checks, for example, and the process. All of them, where to put is a risk response. All kind of control, all self-corrections, all work instructions, all kinds of validation that we do, process validation, project validation, product validation, all of them are also controls that that are based on the risk that we see. Okay. Right. So then, of course, from the framework perspective, I mean, what we see on the right-hand side, this is normally a structure. It's not prescribed. Please understand this. I've only drawn this graphic, but having seen in many, many companies how they do it. So particularly for listed companies, some things are mandatory. We have a board at the top, obviously, and within the board, there's a risk expert, for example, and board is responsible for the profile and the emerging risk of the company. And then under the board, there is audit committee, and the COSO framework also recommends audit committee. And then, of course, we have the CEO and the risk council, as I mentioned to you. Under the risk council, then we have which is chief risk officer and an audit and compliance framework within the organization. And then below that, we have the risk owners and the risk managers. So risk owners and managers, they come from a wide range of function or process areas. Anybody is a risk manager, for example, but risk owner mostly are the people who are responsible, are also owners of the objective or the function. So they are jointly both risk owner and objective or a function owner. Similarly, process owners can also be risk owners, obviously, but risk managers could be anybody involved in the process who would be a risk source, for example, or managing a risk source will be a risk manager. So in a framework, therefore, we define responsibilities in the process, who will be people who will be managing the particular risk. And many times it is not even mentioned as risk, it's just a control. So people are, normally doing their controls, and the risk officer or the risk owner will just look at whether the controls are in place, and that's it. If they're not in place, then he flags it, and then it's again put in place. So many times people are not even aware they're managing a risk, they're just managing a process with the controls, and that's it. So these are of course, the resources for risk management. So the people, so again, most of the time, no additional resources. The same people with the skills and experience and competence, a little more awareness on risk, a mindset of risk is what is required. Same processes that we are following, methods and tools. Additionally, some additional for just managing the risk, and very few of them, as you would have seen, are set up separately for managing the risk. Everything else gets embedded into the system itself. Just those additional measures that we need to take into the processes. And then, of course, the same documented procedures and processes that we have, we just need to look at them once again, look at the controls that are there, and that's the response to the risk. Information and knowledge management system that we have is always a good risk resource, for example, to manage the risk. People can go back, look at what is the correct way of working, they learn from past projects, and therefore the constraints, the errors come down in processes. Training programs, certainly, and of course the related resources, and very specific resources for risk treatment, risk insurance, for example, backup systems, sometimes outsourcing partners. There could be additional resources for it. But as I see over, as you will also see over here, it's just about 5 to 10% or even less. Sometimes that's the investment that you need to make for a ERM framework. Communication in a risk management framework is successful. So we need to have internal communication, which talks about regarding the design and components of the ERM framework itself. People should know what the framework all about, what's the policy, what are the risk attitude and risk appetite. Everybody should be aware. And then how effectively is the ERM framework functioning, goes up to the top level, but everybody must be aware of this. Then how have we identified the risk, and the risk list should be available to everybody. Risk report should be available. They should be communicated to everybody who's responsible, including stakeholders, mind you. And then, of course, the feedback from the risk oversight committees. External, where it's obligatory, particularly external stakeholders. For example, many regulators want information from companies, so that has to be provided to them. Compliance reporting, for example, and then confidence building messages to the public, and for example, to stakeholders, consumers, to customers, to investors, bankers. So those kind of communications are important. And then during emergency, of course, so when we have an actual drill going on, a real drill, emergency situation, crisis management, then it's a very different framework. We have a scenario planning, and communication plays an extremely important role. I'm not touching that today. The emergency part of scenario part of the risk management today is a subject in itself, but communication becomes extremely important. Then this, of course, most of you would be aware. I won't go through this one right now. So monitoring and review, again, for ERM is important. So risk status report, this is being presented by all the risk owners, goes to the chief risk officer, and from there it goes to the risk compliance committee, and then from there it goes to the board. So it's a hierarchy of reporting of the risk. Then key risk indicators at the functional tactical level, also at the top level, they should always be, whenever the strategy being discussed or planning being discussed, there should be a report on the risk indicators. What some of them have been pre-set up, some will be seen fresh. Then all complaints that are received in the company or feedback it must be seen from a risk perspective. Where is the non-compliance? Where is the non-conformance coming from complaints? Similarly, audit reports, internal and external, they must, they always, in any case, they report on non-compliance and non-conformities, but they can additionally look at also from a risk perspective, where they perceive additional risk in attainment of objectives somewhere. Then feedback and reports from regulators, which come by default, so we have to look at them as well, goes into the management review. And then all kinds of business reports, wherever there's a deviation from targets or inconsistencies. So they have to be looked at again, why this has happened and what we did not plan for in the beginning. So therefore, it has to be plugged, and probably new risks will have to be identified and discovered for plugging. And then all kinds of incidents of frauds and violation of code of ethics. So again, and when to do it, it could be periodic evaluations. And then of course, it can also be specific whenever there's a major strategy change or things that we do, major project that we undertake, merger acquisitions or when regulations change, there could be triggers for doing the monitoring and the review. So that's it. And as you see on this slide here, it's quite important, whenever you do something new, so we need to have a risk list, for example, and here we have some, Dilbert is of course looking at this. And the major risk, as we see on the last one, is that I don't understand this risk. And that's of course most of the time is the major risk. So people don't understand risk in the organization, and that's where things start going wrong. So thank you very much for listening to me today. It's been a little kind of a marathon session, but I hope I have been able to cover the important elements of the ERM, created some understanding on how it all looks like. And I hope I have also served the purpose of Amit of integrating risk ERM into the BPM framework. So thank you very much. Any questions, I'll be happy to take.
Thank you so much, sir. Such a great insight about the enterprise risk management framework. Learned a lot about it, especially when you have integrated the risk management with the organization vision and the value systems and the strategies. That has given a very good insight about how organization risk management and business process management can integrate together. So really a good insight. I have few questions.
Yeah. Ahmed, I can't hear you. Sorry.
All right.
Yeah.
So the very first, I have few questions. The question is about what is a good frequency to perform a risk management in an organization? Risks are unforeseen. So is there any best practice, any recommendation how to perform risk management or when to perform risk management?
No, so I think what the question is whether we should do risk management as a one-off exercise. Is that answering that question, if you're not actually implementing a ERM framework, so whenever a new project, for example, is being undertaken, whether it could be within the company, for example, you change your vendor management policy, for example, and you say that we are now actually going to expand our vendor base. So that's a project that we are going to undertake. So expansion of vendor base is fraught with all kinds of risk. We may not identify the right vendors, for example, or there could be competitive elements within the vendors. So also at that point of time, when we do that planning, it's at that time that we should apply kind of a risk brainstorming session and look at the potential risks that would be encountered when we look at this one. So that I'm responding to, assuming that there is no enterprise risk management framework, because ERM, as you would have understood from me, is an ongoing continuous exercise. And I have talked about frequencies and the triggers when you should do a review of the risks. Okay. But answering this question, whenever there's a project that is being undertaken, at that point in time, you must look at the potential risk and try and plug that as a response within the project itself. Okay.
So, another question is about agile risk management. We heard a lot about agile process management, agile project management approach. Is there any concept related to agile enterprise risk management?
So I thought risk was all about agility only. I mean, that's the, I think one of the initial messages that I gave to you was the resilience of the organization. And as we are seeing now, because the changes are happening so fast, actually. So therefore, our scenario planning must also include potential disruptions into the market, for example. As I mentioned also about the Michael Porter's 5 forces. So at all points of time, we must be looking at those. So risk indicators coming from outside the organization. And if we have going, then that will help us in also looking at the emerging risk from there. So if we have an agile system of looking at the risk indicators, then automatically we will also get agility into our risk responses. So that, I think, is the answer for this question.
Perfect. So, sir, in the organizations, this has been seen that there are the risk management team working at the organization level who takes care of identification and mitigation of the risk at the strategy level. And then there is a team which works on the risk management at the process level. So normally we have seen there are the gaps happen in the organization because the risks are identified and monitored and controlled at 2 different stages. So what is your suggestion on this? How to integrate these 2 approaches?
Yeah, so the structure that I showed to you, I think that was these 2 structures. If you follow, can you see the screen here? Yeah. So these 2 structures are the ones that you need to follow. These 2. So there is then, and then of course also this one. So there is this, if you have a risk council here, so everything gets filtered through the risk council. At any place, the risk management team, it is functioning at the functional divisional level. If there is a risk council in the organization, it's outcome of every single risk team in the company at a periodicity that you can fix 3 months or even 1 month or 6 months. The risk report should go to the strategic, to the risk council. And that is the place where it gets integrated. Because if you start working in silos, it's actually not going to work for the organization. Risk is always best work integrated. So it's like this. So therefore, the risk council integrates all the efforts at different functions and levels, all the risk teams, and then that's how it should function. And if you don't have one, please propose in the organization to have a corporate level risk council, which is cross-functional in nature, and that's where it gets integrated. So please do that if you're not doing that.
Perfect. Great, sir. It's a very insightful session. Thank you so much for your time. To all the participants, the webinar recording will be available on demand, and you will get a link for this webinar recording. Once again, thank you very much, sir, for your time and sharing your thoughts. If any question is there, and if I come across with a question, I'll share it with you, and we'll assure to all our delegates that all the questions will be answered, all your queries, suggestions will be communicated. So thank you very much for your participation. Thank you, sir, for your time.
Thank you, Amit. Okay, thanks a lot. Yeah, okay. Thanks, Amit. Thank you.